right, obviously not an ideal spot to be in at all if you are the Cleveland Cavaliers. Down 3-1 in the second round against Indy. They are gearing up, if history repeats itself, for a second consecutive second round loss. This one will sting a little bit more if they end up losing because of the hope and the hype they built up for themselves throughout the regular season. And rightfully so, right? They were the number one seed out east. They were amazing. This was their best season since the LeBron era, obviously. Like, any hype and excitement for Cleveland coming into this postseason was justified. I could see why people were very excited about this team. This is a different system and playing style they're running relative to last season when they were under JB Bickerstaff. So there were a ton of reasons for Cavs fans to be very hyped about this team coming into the postseason, right? It wasn't some fluke. It wasn't some just hype train. No, there were legitimate reasons for people to be excited about this Cavalier squad. But then now we're at this point where they have fallen down in a massive 3-1 hole. NBA history would have to be made in order for them to come back and ultimately swing this series back in their favor. Before I get into the main topic of this video, I want to give a ton of credit to the Indiana Pacers for being in this position. I feel like a lot of times when we talk about a team being in an unfavorable position, whether they're like losing a game or whether they're down in a series, we spend a lot of time just downing that team and never enough time giving the team that made them get in that position the credit they deserve, right? So like when we talk about the Knicks making these massive 20-point comebacks, all people talk about are what the Celtics didn't do right. And I'm kind of like, well, how about we steer the conversation over to what New York did to be able to make that 20-point comeback happen, right? It's not like the team that's up made the conscious decision to just not play well the rest of the way through. There was something that the other team did to put them in that particular position, right? So let me give credit to Indiana. They have been amazing. This looks like, again, if history repeats itself, the second consecutive season of them making the Eastern Conference Finals. If you thought their run to the East Finals last season was just some random Cinderella story, now you have to sit back and realize this Pacers thing is real, right? This Tyrese Halliburton and Pascal Siakam situation, this is a real thing. This is a real team to be worried about out in the East for the coming seasons. Again, they have to close the deal and ultimately win this series and close the door officially on Cleveland. But from the way things are looking, they are geared up for another conference finals appearance in the Tyrese Halliburton era, which has just been amazing so far. But looking at Cleveland's issues, I wanted to talk about Donovan Mitchell in particular. And before I get into that, I wanted to preface by saying I am not in any way, shape, or form putting this situation entirely on Donovan Mitchell's back. This series, he has been amazing. I think coming into that game 4, he was averaging like 40 points per game or something like that throughout the series. I'm not going to put this all on Donovan Mitchell at all. That's not fair, right? We knew there were some flaws with Cleveland as a whole coming into the postseason. For example, their defense. There were some questions about their defensive attack. Yes, they ranked solidly as far as like the advanced stuff like defensive rating or whatever the case may be, but we still knew there were some holes in their defensive attack. They gave up a lot of three-point shots, right? So you knew there were going to be issues with Cleveland from a defensive perspective, and there's no worse series for that to rear its head in than in a series against a high-octane, fast-paced Indiana Pacers offense like this. So again, not going to put this all on Mitchell. It's not fair to do that at all. But here's my question with Mitchell. And we kind of had this conversation a bit once he came over to Cleveland. Is he truly a player that you can build a championship team around? And we have that question with a lot of all-star players over the course of time, right? We had that question with Russell Westbrook. We had that question at a point in time with Paul George. We had that question at one point with the Giannis Antetokounmpo. We've had that question on such a consistent basis for a lot of different players throughout the course of the history of the game, both long-term and more modern NBA history. And some guys are able to answer that question, right? Giannis answered that question in 2021 when he won his first championship, right? If you had questions about Jokic and whether or not he's a guy you can build a team around to win a title with, he answered that question back in 2023. So some guys are able to answer that question for us and put some of those concerns to rest, but there are others who are not, right? So Russell Westbrook being a perfect example, Paul George being another example. I don't even think Paul George has made an NBA Finals appearance yet in his career. James Harden being an example of that, right? Like there are a lot of players who were able to prove that they are guys you can can bring a championship team around. And there were some other players who said and proved to us otherwise. Donovan Mitchell is slowly, not yet, because it's still very early in his career, but he's slowly starting to fall into that category, right? We're going to question, does it even make sense to try to build a championship contender around him? And I don't know what it is, right? I don't think there are like these massive flaws in his game that limit him from being a player you can build a contender around or whatever the case may be. But at this point, it's too much of a trend for him to have these really good teams and have these really good regular seasons and get to the postseason and they can't get past second round, right? He's been in the playoffs pretty much every season of his career. I think every single season of his career, he's been in the playoffs. Like looking at his rookie season, he was leading that Jazz team to the NBA postseason and got them, ironically, to the second round in his rookie year. He has consistently been a playoff guy. You're not going to run into too many postseason series where Donovan Mitchell is not involved. But again, there's like this ceiling that he continues to hit each and every time. Sometimes you could point the finger on him, right? Like there were some years where he was really bad from an efficiency standpoint. There were some times in the playoffs where he was like high 30s from the floor. There were some times where he was like in the mid 20s from three for an entire postseason run. We've had those sorts of situations, but then you've also had some amazing individual playoff runs from him. Looking at particularly the 2020 playoffs. I know they lost in the first round, but in that first round against Denver in the bubble, he averaged 36 points per game, right? So he's had like these up and down, high and low moments where you're like, yep, he's done enough in the postseason for us to think that it makes sense to build a team around him. And then there are these other moments where, again, you start questioning those things. So once you just continuously see that trend, again, you come back to this question and wonder, is he one of those guys that you really can't build a contender around, right? Does he fall into that category of like a Harden or a Paul George or whatever the case may be, where you have these players who are amazing individually, but could never really lead a team to getting past the hump? And I don't know what the reason for that is, right? For Harden, I could tell you it was some flaws in his offensive game, right? He played a style of basketball that sometimes wasn't super sustainable for the playoffs. Same with Russell Westbrook, right? He played a style of basketball that wasn't super sustainable for the postseason. There are going to be situations where we can pinpoint why a player isn't a guy that you could really build a contender around. With Mitchell is weird because, again, there aren't massive flaws in his offensive game. There aren't massive holes. He is an amazing shot creator. He can work off the ball. Very underrated passer and playmaker at his position. I think the best and most assists he's averaged in a season was around 6. Like, really good all-around offensive threat. He's not a horrible defensive player, right? Like, he isn't great, but he isn't horrible. But you really wonder, what about Mitchell continuously puts him in these positions where he's got these amazing regular season squads, but gets to the playoffs and can't get over the hump, right? Like, he is the definition of a player who can just never get a team over the hump. And again, like, we've had these seasons where he's led a team to like a number 1 seed out in his conference and they just can't get over the hump. Looking at, I think, that 2021 season, Utah had the number 1 seed. Then you're also looking at this particular season where Cleveland has the number 1 overall seed, right? Like, there's this massive contrast all the time between what Mitch was able to lead his team to doing in the regular season and what ends up happening in the postseason. Now, to be completely fair, injuries have played a part of things over these last couple of seasons. Obviously, injuries played a factor in that second round, late in that second round against the Celtics last year, and injuries are going to play a factor with this particular series. Obviously, he was hurt near the end of Game 4 here against Indy. So injuries have played a factor a bit, but I'm not going to sit here and act like that is like the overarching excuse, because even before he got to Cleveland, we had those questions about him. Again, I don't think he was in the league long enough for us to really make it a large point of concern. But I think now we're in that place where it is a fair conversation to have, right? This is yet another season, and he's a little later in his career where, yes, his team is amazing during the regular season. But again, there's this wall, there's this ceiling they hit come playoff time, right? And again, he's got time, right? Donovan Mitchell is considered a veteran, right? But at the same time, he's still young. There are a lot of years left on his career. He's not in a position where he's like in his late 30s or whatever. I don't even think he's 30 something right now. I could be wrong. I'd have to check. But there's still a ton of time for Mitchell to get this thing figured out and really realize where he's most optimized at. And that's where I want to get to, right? Like, where is Donovan Mitchell truly optimized at? Is he optimized as a number 1 run your offense through him sort of player? Is that his most optimized, most ideal role, because quite frankly, that's been the role he's played his entire career. And here are the results. Again, amazing individual stuff, some spectacular individual performances, but again, no real postseason success, no conference finals appearance, no NBA finals appearance, right? So he's played this role for long enough for us to really wonder if this is where he is at his absolute best at. And we've had that question again with a ton of guys throughout the course of NBA history, where maybe on one team they're looked at as a number one option, but later we feel like and we understand that they're optimized in a different position. So look at Kyrie, for example, right? Kyrie, it's a bit of a reverse situation where we found out later that he wasn't going to be optimized as a number one option. But when he was playing second fiddle to LeBron and acting more as kind of a complementary scoring option next to LeBron, and that's really a bit of an understatement calling him a complementary option, because he was key to their 2016 finals win. And he worked so much as a primary shot creator in some situations, but he was still second fiddle to LeBron to a certain extent. So like that was a role that he was optimized in, right? Made multiple finals appearances, won an NBA championship appearance, right? In 2016, made the biggest shot, in my opinion, in NBA history with that shot over Curry, then goes over to Boston to try to lead the team to contention, and they could never get over the hump. And again, injuries did play a factor there. I think his first season in Boston, he got hurt, but that second season, they still ran into a wall in the playoffs, and I think they ended up losing, I believe, in the second round, right? Like, we realize that about guys is maybe they're optimized in different roles and in different positions. So with Mitchell, that could be his reality, right? Maybe he isn't optimized as a number one option sort of player. Maybe. And again, I'm not sitting here saying there are massive flaws in his offensive game and there are like these weaknesses that are so glaring where I'm like, he'll never be able to win if he doesn't get better at this. I think Mitchell has a very complete, great playing style, right? Like, he's an amazing offensive force, does a lot on that end. He's better than a lot of guys. He's like one of the top tier shot creators in the NBA. He's got that under his belt, but you wonder if this is where he's the most optimized at. And I think that's the key question is, not will Donovan Mitchell ever win a championship, but what role, what position, what way do you play Donovan Mitchell where he's the most optimized and the most ideal on a championship contending group? So we'll see what happens. And again, Cleveland could surprise us and ultimately end up making NBA history and coming back from down 3-1. Teams have done it before, but again, it's so rare, right, that you'd have to put them in the history books as one of the few to make that thing happen, coming back 3-1 to win a series. So we'll see, right? But just not a favorable position. And again, there are going to be these questions about Donovan Mitchell continuously resurfacing if he keeps coming into the playoffs with these amazing individual performances and these amazing groups, but not being able to truly get over the hump and get past the second round, which has just been a large trend throughout the course of his career.